Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my 2026 Gaithersburg Book Festival vlog. The Gaithersburg Book Festival is a local to me book festival in the suburbs, DC suburbs of Maryland in Montgomery County, where I live, just a little bit over in another town in Gaithersburg. I believe this year they are celebrating, or they did celebrate, their 15th year, and the festival this year occurred on May 16th. I've been going, I think, to most of the festivals of most of the years. Yeah, I'm not sure, I haven't done an official count or anything, but it is now very much a staple of my reading year. And it's becoming a pretty big festival. We have a variety of writers, a lot are local, but some come from further away too, in several genres for kids and adults, in fiction and nonfiction. And then meanwhile, the local writer center has some writing workshops for kids and adults. I didn't take part this year. There's also some kid-centric, programming. There's local-ish groups, literary groups that come in, and there's ways for exhibitors like, indie authors and others to rent some table space. And so it has this really, I think, fun sort of semi-local but also expanding feel that I think it was like something like 150 authors who were officially part of the panel discussions and the book signings events. And it also, I think, got big enough this year that the Friends of the Library in Montgomery County, they decided to split up their used book sale into two different tents, one for adults and one for kids. And then we also have Politics and Prose, which is a major indie bookstore staple of Washington, D.C., that was selling the books of all of the panelists. And, they're definitely encouraging people to buy those books, because I think that's how the festival keeps getting bigger and bigger as publishers keep sending more and more authors. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a pretty nice day. Maybe got a tiny bit burnt, but it was sunny and nice, and I had a great time. And here is the brochure and the artwork this year. I think I really like the artwork with the bird and the wings that are a book, and it's a nice color scheme that I also put into my thumbnail. And so yeah, this is our brochure, our pamphlet of events. We have the calendar of all of the different tents that are named for various localish authors for adult programming and for kids programming. And then we have all of like the Children's Village information. That's a lot of activities for them. And the writing workshops are here, and we have various exhibitors that come in, also a lot of yummy food trucks. Here is the map that takes place in this really nice park in Gaithersburg. It's really spread out, and it actually has some very picturesque views. And then we have all of our featured authors and etc. One of the other big things I wanted to do this year is, well, I always try to take you along a little bit with like a little bit of B-roll, which I'll show soon. But in the past, I feel like, I was trying to find my footing. Maybe that's apt verbiage, because I remember kind of going up and down some rows of exhibitor booths with like a shaky cam. But this year I really wanted to, first of all, I wanted to participate more for myself and go to more panels. And I thought, well, maybe I could try to find a way to sort of incorporate some of those panels into the B-roll. And just in general, I just hope I'm continuing to make things, broader in scope of showing you around and better executed in my very amateur small fry booktube way. So yeah, I feel really good about it this year, and I hope you enjoy this experience of the Gaithersburg Book Festival right here.
protagonist. She's the outsider who's trying to ingratiate herself with a clique of very privileged girls. This chapter is actually from the perspective of Mrs. Tibbert, who is the college president's wife, and you never actually see the
life that they were barely managing together. Nancy had to take all of that responsibility on her own. And she was lucky that she had two relatively responsible children who could raise themselves. But
so much a story about a young man in his mid-20s who comes home, and when Evan first returns home, his mother is sick and she's cooked him this lovely meal. She lives alone.
conflict that you have with raising children, where one parent is cool with one thing and the other is not necessarily as cool with it, and you have to have each other's back, and it becomes a thing. Writing kids.
Magic system, magic item, that means that earlier books would have gone differently had people known that they existed. That's probably it as far as an immutable rule, right?
All right, well, I also thought I'd give a little bit of a rundown and my take on the events that I went to this year. Early on, I went ahead and consulted the calendar, or the schedule, I should say, as soon as I could to decide which authors I would want to see in their panels, but also which ones I'd want to buy their books and get them signed. So here are the two books, and actually these two authors were speaking together as well and then signing side by side, so that's why I decided to make the questionable budget decision of buying two books instead of one. So this one is All the World Can Hold by Jung, which I talked about, I think, in a recent video. I did a mock reads historical fiction video of books I wanted to get to this year, and this is one of them. It's her third book. I really liked her first book. And then this one is The Boy from the North Country by Sam Sussman, and it's kind of big, I think, in literary circles. I first heard about it because it was lauded a lot on the Jewish Book Council website. It was shortlisted for the National Jewish Book Awards, and it was one of the first books that they highlighted in their new book box, New Reads. So he'd been doing a lot of press with the Jewish Book Council as well. And so this is a book, I've talked about this book in the past and gushed over, well, it's autofiction, and Sussman could be the son of Bob Dylan, which is, a kind of big deal. There's a little noise going on outside my condo right now, and I guess they also think Sam Sussman is a big deal. But anyway, the major thing about this autofiction novel has less to do with the character's relationship with his father, and actually much more to do with the relationship with his mother at the end of her life. So I'm really looking forward to both of these books. I got them signed. I'll give more of my awkward author interaction thoughts, I think, during my upcoming book haul video. And since I'm already talking about them, and I actually went to their panel stuff and signing stuff at the beginning of the day, which was nice because fewer of the crowds were there at that point, I'll just go ahead and insert a second clip here, a longer clip of the two of them in conversation where perhaps controversially they're talking about a lack of a line between fiction and nonfiction, which I feel like as a BookTube Prize judge might rub some of my fellow nonfiction judges the wrong way, because I do feel like some of them on BookTube talk about, well, I wouldn't read fiction, but I don't know. Anyway, maybe this stands more for memoir. Maybe there is a little bit more of a blurry space between memoir and fiction. I probably could get on board with that. Maybe less so with the other nonfiction types. Another thing they do in this clip is they bring up the writing craft book Refused to Be Done by Matt Bell. I should remember that name and author because actually that book is lauded very heavily by members of my own writing salon, and I think I might try to get to reading it during NaNoWriMo this year. But anyway, it was a really interesting talk, and here's just a little tease of it.
I know, Jung, you even say in the beginning of your book that this is the most personal book that you have ever written. And Sam, your book is, I would think, autofiction in a way that takes us deep into the search for a mother and a father, right? So Jung, why write a novel now instead of writing a memoir?
I tell my students that I'm a very uncomfortable essayist and an uncomfortable memoirist because most of my time as a professor is spent reading books, writing at my desk, and like sitting in a rocking chair with like warm socks. So it's not a very active life to write memoirs about. This one is taking a lot of threads of my own personal experience post 9/11 because I was actually on a cruise to 9/11. After 9/11 to Bermuda, and the book tracks the same days of travel that we were on this ship. And I think for a long time I resisted the idea of taking something that was very personal to me and putting it in novel form, or even really talking about what I was doing post 9/11. But for 20 plus years I've been thinking about this event, coming back to it in my writing, and realizing that cruise really affected the way that I processed the series of events that took place back then. So, in writing this book and setting it on the ship, I did have to come to some level of comfort with the fact that I am pulling threads from my own life more than I ever have before. But in truth, I think like every single character that I've ever written in this book and others, they all have my DNA in them somehow. I just think that these three characters have more of my DNA than I have written.
We're hitting the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Do you think that gave you some permission to look back 25 years at this cruise from inspired by the Love Boat, but not quite the Love Boat?
Right. Permission? No. I mean, I've been trying to write about it, and there's a great book by Matthew Bell about revision, and it's called Refused to Be Done.
Refused to Be Done.
Refused to Be Done. And in that book, he talks about the shadow novel, which is the book we write before we realize the book that we're actually trying to write. And I have a couple of different shadow novels related to 9/11, that were written 5 years after the event, 12 years after the event, and none of them were quite right. So I don't think it has anything to do with the 25th anniversary coming up. I think it was just the metabolism of my own kind of writing experience and my own thoughts about this coming together finally in the form of a novel.
And Sam, memoir versus novel, art?
Well, I'm just a little confused by this practice of dividing the world up into fiction and nonfiction. I think the most compelling things in life sit between fiction and nonfiction. Memory, emotion, all of our relationships sit somewhere between fiction and nonfiction. I don't even really know what nonfiction is. It's just defined by a negative. It's not fiction, right? But I'm interested in how the stories we tell about our life shape our identities and affirm who we do or don't want to be. And I think there's an easy way of thinking about this, that fiction is invention and nonfiction is truth. But to me, that's too slippery, it's too easy, right? So if I ask you, how was your day? And you list all of the negative things that happened in your day, it's truth, right? You're describing facticity, right? But you could also tell me all the positive things that happened. And these would be two different stories. They're each true. But the atmosphere between us, the emotion between us, even neurochemically, what's happening in our minds and hearts is completely different. So we use story to conjure atmosphere and to tell who we are.
Well, to bring connection, which I think you do very much in your stories. You have a wonderful quote. I'll quote you back to yourself. The ambition of any artist is to create a work of art that is larger than the experiences that go into that work by simply offering lucidity or facts of one's life. Right? So you're saying the facts aren't enough. I'm not interested.
Well, right, and this is a novel that's so concerned with what it means to transform life into art. So there are three characters in the book who are trying to do that. There's Jung, who's drawn from my mother, who's a young actress in 1970s New York, and she's trying to take very painful experiences she's had in her life and make sense of them by playing Hedda Gabler, right? And then she has a relationship with Dylan at this moment. Like, he's going through this deep artistic and personal crisis, and he's trying to take the agony of his divorce and his feelings of insufficiency as an artist and put them into what will become Blood on the Tracks, right? And then there's Evan, June's son, who's trying to take some of the pain and difficulty of his life and turn that into a novel drawn from his mother's wisdom. So
We won't say that the fact is your middle name is Evan. Don't say that, Carrie.
that's a fact. That's a fact. But what's more interesting, if I can say so, is what I do with that fact. Like, so for example, okay, I'm from Goshen, New York, right? And the character is from Goshen, right? That's a fact, but it only becomes an interesting fact when in the novel I try to make a biblical metaphor of what is Goshen in the Bible, right? And then I tell a story, right, about what Goshen has meant to June and to Evan, right? Right? So that's, I think that practice of transforming the facticity or experience into something larger. I just want to say one thing about this, which is when you read a book, when you see words on the page, there's an immediate instinct to try to understand, is that true or is that invented? But we don't do it with other art forms. Is music, painting, film, are these things true? Are they fictions? Well, there's something that lives in between that. That to me is what's most enthralling in life.
I have a Spanish friend who just told me recently his work is in translation in the United States, and they don't have those distinctions between fiction and nonfiction in Europe at all. It's a distinctly North American kind of trade. So, yeah, I see all that.
Well, moving on into the other panels, I just caught maybe the second half of Sarah Goodman Confino. She is a women's fiction writer and maybe a bit of a romance writer. And I actually have one of her books, over there on that shelf way to the side. So it's on my TBR, so that's why I figured I'd want to listen to her, because she writes this Jewish, upmarket women's fiction, which I put a lot of it on the TBR, and then I struggle with it because I guess at heart I'm a literary fiction reader. And I feel like this type of, upmarket fiction, it skates a little too shallowly on the surface sometimes for my preferences. And, it was fun listening to the panel because there's a little bit of horniness to the romance panels, and the panelists like are, you know, really salivating over the characters. But, you know, I'm hoping to at least get to her book. Like so many, you know, genre writer. She is very prolific, so she's well past the book on my shelves by this point. And then I went to see Jen Lyons in a fantasy, epic fantasy panel. And Jen Lyons has also been on my TBR for a while. I have her book on my BookTube Spin TBR game that I play quarterly, and I'm hoping one day I'll actually spin her book that's on it and read it. And she just went ahead and published a new standalone book and was in conversation with another author. And I have to say, I'm a little distant, I think, from some of the ways that fantasy writers talk about their books. And maybe it comes back to me being a literary fiction writer again, that, well, you know, I don't know, maybe that's weird, but I still feel like I come at fantasy, because I'm writing my own fantasy novel and a sci-fi short story right now, but I come at it from like a deeply like literary, trying to get at the issue sort of way. This whole idea of escapism doesn't usually speak to me. And so I feel like if I were on a fantasy panel, if I ever, you know, got my novel published, I'd want people to ask me about my thematic influences and how I was influenced by real life culture and real life history, and how we could play with that in a fantasy setting. Or maybe I'd want to, you know, be asked about what I took from Granddaddy Tolkien in my lore building or something like that. But instead, you know, the questions in this panel were all like, you know, what's your favorite trope and least favorite trope? And what do you think about romantasy? And I'm like, this just doesn't speak to me. But I still have Jen Lyons on my list, and they still did tease her works as, you know, complex characters dealing with political intrigue, and that there is certainly a lot of world building, which can't all just be about tropes, I hope. And, you know, it has to go a little bit deeper than that. At least I'm hoping so. Hopefully I'll get to her novel soon enough. Slightly future Rachel here, making a long video even longer, but I didn't feel right about not mentioning Lacey Dunham on this recap, because I did have her in my Be Real. She is a local author, and we actually a million years ago were in a writing class together, and I even went to her book launch for The Bells and highlighted it in one of my book haul videos. And so I wanted to go ahead and see her, and I thought I'd slip into the back of her panel, and anyway, but then she noticed me and said, hey! And she even referenced me in her talk, because she said, well, you know, I actually said something during the book launch, you know, Rachel was there, and I'm like, oh, it was so cool to be called out, I guess. And then I thought, well, I should at least ask a question then, and so, you know, I asked a semi-spoilerly question about The Bells, which is this gothic dark academic novel that takes place at a girls' college in the 1950s with this very toxic friends group, which they commit a murder together on these pages. And so anyway, it was a very enjoyable read, and I'm very happy that I got to talk to her about the book slightly again after I finished it. I also wanted to give a little bit more about Sarah Goodman Confino, the, you know, women's upmarket romance writer I went to see. And the whole reason she was even on my radar at all was because she is a Jewish writer, and she's been featured on the Jewish Book Council website as well, where I basically live. So that's why I decided to give her book, one of her books, a go, and check her out at this Bookfest. And she did say something near the end of the panel that really did resonate with me personally, because she talked about how important it was for her to feature Jewish American characters where their Jewishness wasn't central to their character, but, you know, she wanted to make sure that in this environment where Jews are othered so often, that there's some representation, that we're people and that we exist. And, you know, that really speaks to me as somebody. I've been tracking publishing news since October 7th, and about the difficulties for Israeli writers and Jewish writers overall to get publishing deals, or agents in some case, or just the general atmosphere in the literary world, including on BookTube, where, you know, it's people don't bat an eyelash to say just because someone was born in Israel you won't read their book, or if a character is mentioned in passing as being Israeli, you know, there have been uprisings about that with famous authors recently as well. So basically, you know, it meant something to me as a Jewish reader and a writer for, you know, Sarah Goodman Confino to have that Jewish joy and pride perspective. And so anyway, I wanted to also hold up her book that is on my bookshelves, Don't Forget to Write. So that about covers it for me now. Of course, I'll leave more information about the Gaithersburg Book Festival down below. Also our bookstores like the Politics and Prose Bookstore and my Friends of the Library Bookstore. And I'll leave links to all of the author pages of the authors who I highlighted in this video. I'm looking forward to getting to more of these books soon, and speaking of which, expect me back on this channel at the end of the week with my final Am Reading video for May, where I do actually engage in reading and not just accumulating books, so stay tuned for that. And I hope all of you are having a wonderful month of reading, and if you have attended any literary events that have made your day, I'd love to hear about them. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.